Let's be honest, Star Wars has always been a story of good versus evil. The Jedi, with their glowing lightsabers and wise philosophies, were supposed to be the ultimate good. But when you really start to analyze their actions, their teachings, and their mistakes, the cracks in their shining image become impossible to ignore. Sure, they dressed like monks and talked about balance in the Force, but were they really practicing what they preached? Or were they just a self-righteous order enforcing their narrow idea of what the galaxy should look like? The Jedi's greatest failure might have been their arrogance. They believed they were the ultimate protectors of peace, but their rigid rules and lack of emotional understanding pushed people away. Anakin Skywalker didn't turn to the dark side overnight. It was years of neglect, mistrust, and dismissal by the Jedi that fueled his fall. They ignored his fears, demanded emotional suppression, and acted like they knew best, all while failing to see the obvious pain they were causing. If the Jedi had been more flexible, could the rise of Darth Vader have been avoided? Then there's the matter of their so-called moral high ground. The Jedi claimed they didn't crave power, yet they were neck-deep in politics and war. Their involvement in the Clone Wars turned them from peacekeepers into soldiers, which went against everything they claimed to stand for. They wielded enormous influence in the Galactic Senate, yet they often used it to push their own agenda instead of serving the galaxy's best interests. Their actions blurred the line between guardians of peace and enforcers of control. In this video, we're going to explore this darker side of the Jedi Order. What if they weren't the heroes we've been told they are? What if their actions and philosophies made them complicit in the very destruction they were trying to prevent? From their failures with Anakin to their blindness to Palpatine's schemes, the Jedi's role in Star Wars might be more sinister than we ever realized. Let's dive in and uncover the truth about the galaxy's supposed saviors. Let's talk about the Jedi Code for a second. On paper, it sounds all wise and mystical, but in practice, it was an absolute disaster. The whole no attachments, no emotions thing. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. Instead of helping Jedi find balance, the code just set them up to implode when life got tough. It's like they wanted their own members to fail. Look at Anakin again. He's the poster child for how messed up the Jedi Code was. He wasn't allowed to love, wasn't allowed to fear losing her, and wasn't allowed to ask for help when he started spiraling. Instead of support, the Jedi gave him lectures and told him to suck it up. That's not balance, that's emotional sabotage. And the code wasn't just bad for the Jedi, it was bad for the people they were supposed to protect. Their whole no attachments thing made them come off as cold and distant. How are you supposed to trust someone who's basically telling you they don't care about you on a personal level? It's no wonder the galaxy turned on them when things started going south. The Jedi Code wasn't some holy guide to enlightenment, it was a rulebook for disaster. It tried to turn people into something they're not, and ignored the fact that emotions are part of what makes us human, or alien, in this case. The Jedi's obsession with their code was just another reason they failed so spectacularly. The Jedi joining the Clone Wars was probably the dumbest decision they ever made. They were supposed to be peacekeepers, but instead, they threw themselves into a war and started acting like generals. How do you go from, we don't fight unless we have to leading armies into battle? The hypocrisy is unreal. And let's not even get started on how they treated the clones. These were living, breathing people. But to the Jedi, they were just tools. They didn't question the ethics of using an army of genetically engineered soldiers. They just went with it. For a group that claimed to value all life, they sure didn't treat the clones with much respect. The worst part, the Jedi were so busy playing soldiers that they completely missed Palpatine's power grab. The guy was right there, pulling all the strings, and the Jedi didn't see it because they were too focused on the war. Instead of stopping a tyrant, they became pawns in his game. It's embarrassing, honestly. By the end of the war, the Jedi had completely lost the plot. They weren't peacekeepers anymore, they were part of the problem. Their involvement in the Clone Wars didn't just ruin their reputation, it helped destroy the galaxy. A bunch of idiots, if you ask me. The Jedi loved to act like they were the galaxy's saviors, but their legacy is a lot messier than they'd like to admit. Sure, they had some good moments, but their failures were massive and impossible to ignore. From Anakin's fall to their blind spot with Palpatine, they made one bad decision after another, and the galaxy paid the price. Even the people closest to them struggled with their methods. Ahsoka Tano left because the Jedi turned their backs on her when she needed them most. Count Dooku left because he couldn't stand their hypocrisy. Even Luke Skywalker, their poster boy, ended up questioning their teachings and walking away. If the Jedi were so great, why did so many people feel like they had to leave? And let's not forget how their arrogance practically handed the galaxy over to the Empire. They were so busy patting themselves on the back that they didn't see Palpatine taking control right in front of them. For a group that claimed to understand the Force better than anyone, they sure missed all the red flags. So, what's the real legacy of the Jedi? Are they heroes? Or are they just a cautionary tale about how not to run things? Honestly, it's probably a bit of both. But one thing's for sure, the Jedi weren't the perfect heroes they tried to make themselves out to be. The Jedi loved to act like they were nothing like the Sith, but let's be real, they had more in common than they'd like to admit. Both groups were obsessed with power and control, just in different ways. The Sith embraced it openly, while the Jedi tried to hide it behind their moral superiority. But at the end of the day, they were both about imposing their will on the galaxy. Take their whole stance on emotions, the Sith said. Use your emotions, while the Jedi said, pretend you don't have any. Neither approach worked, but at least the Sith were honest about it. The Jedi, on the other hand, acted like they were above all that, even though their actions often contradicted their teachings. It's no wonder people didn't trust them. Then there's how they dealt with Anakin. The Sith saw his potential and nurtured it, even if it was for their own twisted reason. The Jedi saw the same potential and got scared. Instead of helping him channel his emotions in a healthy way, they pushed him away, making it easy for the Sith to swoop in. If that's not a failure of leadership, I don't know what is. The Jedi and the Sith were more alike than either side wanted to admit. They were both flawed in their own ways, and their refusal to see their similarities only fueled their endless conflict. Maybe if the Jedi had spent less time pretending to be perfect, and more time actually learning from their mistakes, things would have turned out differently. Let's face it, the Jedi weren't exactly the best example of how to live your life. They had all these fancy teachings about peace and balance, but their rules were so out of touch with reality it's almost laughable. No attachments, no emotions, no fun. How is anyone supposed to follow that? They expected people to be robotic monks while living in a galaxy full of chaos and emotions. It's no wonder things fell apart. Take Anakin, for instance. The guy was drowning in feelings, fear, love, anger, and instead of helping him deal with them, the Jedi just told him to shove it all down. That's not how emotions work, and you'd think a group as old as the Jedi would know that. Instead, they basically handed him over to Palpatine, who was all too happy to give him the guidance the Jedi refused to provide. Way to go, Jedi. And it's not just about Anakin, they were bad role models for everyone. They didn't practice what they preached, constantly breaking their own rules when it suited them. They'd lecture others about detachment, but would jump into wars and politics without a second thought. Their hypocrisy was off the charts, and it's a miracle anyone took them seriously. In the end, the Jedi weren't wise sages. They were out of touch, know-it-alls who set people up for failure. Their rules and philosophies made things harder for everyone, including themselves. Honestly, the galaxy deserved better than what the Jedi were offering. Now that we've taken a closer look at the Jedi Order, it's clear their legacy isn't as heroic as it first appears. They claimed to stand for peace and justice, yet their decisions often led to chaos and destruction. Their inability to adapt to changing circumstances, their rigid adherence to outdated codes, and their dismissive treatment of individuals like Anakin Skywalker reveal a deeply flawed organization. The Jedi weren't just victims of Palpatine's schemes, they were active participants in their own downfall. One of the most striking examples of their failure is how they handled those who didn't conform to their narrow ideals. Count Dooku left the Order because he saw their hypocrisy. Ahsoka Tano walked away after being wrongfully accused and abandoned by the very people who were supposed to trust her. Even Luke Skywalker, who became a Jedi legend, struggled with the weight of their teachings and ultimately questioned their methods. The Jedi's inability to foster true understanding and compassion alienated even their most loyal allies. Their downfall wasn't just poetic, it was ironic. They were so focused on upholding their self-righteous image that they missed the most obvious threats. Palpatine didn't just outmaneuver them, he exposed their arrogance, their blindness, and their vulnerability. For an Order that claimed to understand the Force better than anyone, their failure to sense the darkness rising in their midst was nothing short of catastrophic. The galaxy didn't need their rigid dogma. It needed leaders who could adapt, empathize, and see the bigger picture. So, were the Jedi truly the villains of Star Wars? Maybe it's not that black and white, but their actions and failures make it hard to see them as pure heroes. Perhaps they were a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing too much in your own righteousness. At the end of the day, the Jedi were as flawed and human as anyone else, and their downfall serves as a reminder that even the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows.